Hello, we're here today with Dr. Maricar Limpin of the Philippine Heart Center. She is a tobacco cessation expert and also a pulmonary care and sleep specialist. We are here to talk about e-cigarettes. Dr. Limpin is also the executive director of Action on Smoking and Health here in the Philippines. So, welcome, Dr. Limpin. Thank you for speaking with us.
Yeah, nice to be here, Janela.
Okay, so my first question is about the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and health and related health problems, because last week the Department of Health announced that vaping-related complications are now part of that classification system. So can you explain to our viewers what that is first?
Well, first and foremost, we already have a term for the lung injury illnesses that is now being seen in the U.S. So it's now the term that is now that we are supposed to use is the e-cigarette or vape-associated lung injury. If you have to code it, according to the ICD-10 code, it can fall under J68.9. J68.9, actually J60 to 69, these are all on respiratory diseases. And for 68.9, it specifies respiratory diseases caused by inhalation of smoke, fumes, vapors, no? So definitely it can fall under this category.
Okay, so this new classification or this new code in the classification, I mean, what does this imply for patients first and then for medical professionals?
Well, it implies that a lung injury that is associated with the use of e-cigarette or with any vape products, it can now be classified under a specific respiratory condition, and we see that it fits into the classification system that we have just mentioned earlier. We can actually, it also means that number one, it means that there is such a disease, and therefore it should really have a proper labeling, a proper name for it, and that it will fall under a certain category. And then it also means that it is one of the diseases now that we really have to look at, and as part of our medical history, we need to ask the history of e-cigarette use or the use of vape products, which actually before, and even myself, I usually forget to ask about the history of vaping or of the use of e-cigarette. What we usually asked is the history of smoking. So it never entered our mind that now we will really be faced with diseases that are associated with the use of e-cigarettes. So it is now really linked with a certain disease that one gets from the use of that product.
So you mentioned that it is now required to get it to ask about.
Yeah, we are now telling everyone that they should ask the history of vaping, particularly in individuals who come to them, seek their help because of sudden respiratory problem that includes coughing, shortness of breath, or maybe even difficulty of breathing and sputum production. It's very important that they should ask, because otherwise then we will not be able to really document that there are diseases that can be developed as a result of the use of e-cigarettes.
So what do we know about e-cigarettes, like based on existing studies?
Well, based on existing studies, they have actually shown that the chemicals that you see in a regular cigarette, in conventional cigarette, are exactly the same chemicals that you see with e-cigarettes, except probably that the concentration of these chemicals in e-cigarettes are lower compared to the conventional cigarettes. And probably that's the reason why, most of the e-cigarette manufacturers are claiming that the e-cigarettes are less harmful. But in reality, if you look at what they're, the evidence that they are showing to us, they really do not have any hard evidence that e-cigarettes are less harmful. Lower concentration does not necessarily mean less harm. You have to remember that in e-cigarettes, in the conventional cigarettes, most of the chemicals are toxic and poisonous. And even with poisons, no, if you look at it, even if you take them in small amounts, they are still poison. Now, I think it's just a matter of time. If you take small amounts of poison, it is still going to poison you and eventually kill you. So they cannot actually say that just because they have lower concentration, it is less harmful.
Can you talk about a bit about these chemicals? What kind of chemicals are in regular cigarettes that are also found in e-cigarettes or ends?
Well, the studies have shown that mostly all of these are chemicals that contain, like, let us say, they also contain carbon monoxide, they also contain lead, they also contain the nitrosamines, many nitrosamines, different types of nitrosamines, and nitrosamines are cancer-causing, known cancer-causing agents. So there are NNN, NNK, NNH, the various levels, and then there are also benzenes, and then there is also toluene. Toluene is actually is a component of rugby, and people get high with toluene. So it is again another addictive component, addictive substance in cigarettes that is also seen with e-cigarettes. Of course, there is diacetyl, there is even propylene glycol, glycerin, so many other chemicals. So it's just really very difficult for me to be saying the other chemicals because there are so many.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned some of the preliminary symptoms, for example, is coughing.
Yeah.
How about the extreme ones? What have been
it can
reported?
be, you can have shortness of breath, some wheezing. In fact, right now I was just talking earlier on today. I was talking to a pediatric pulmonologist in Cebu because I actually saw her post on Facebook that there is this child. It's not really a child, but I think that's 16 or 17 years old, had previous history of smoking, but just about maybe an insignificant smoking history of about 5 years, of just 5 or 0.5, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, no, not even 5 years. I remember this is just
like
16, 17 years old. Yeah, probably like that. And then actually, but this same person has been vaping for about 7 months. And this same person was admitted, she has to admit her to the intensive care unit because this person has been having shortness of breath with wheeziness. It's like asthma. But unfortunately, this individual is not an asthmatic. So having these symptoms and yet having difficulty of breathing, having obstruction of the airways. So we now have, that's why I was actually telling the person to report it already to the Department of Health. So she said that she's going to go tomorrow to the DOH to really personally report the case so that this can be investigated.
How about you? Have you personally handled people who come to you and say they're experiencing this sort of symptom related to?
No. Really, on a personal note, no, I have not.
But
actually
from the doctors you interacted
seen. So far, we actually had one case who had, really an acute lung injury as well, and we couldn't find any. Just admitted here in Heart Center, we couldn't find any cause for the really hard evidence for the acute respiratory symptoms that this patient has. So we are currently investigating what is the cause, but our doctors, younger colleagues, they forgot to ask the history of vaping. So they told me that the patient has no history of smoking, but when I asked them about the history of vaping, they did not actually was not able to get it. But when they went back to the patient, so the patient actually did not have any history of vaping, so we cannot actually say that that is because of vaping. So we really need to get the history of e-cigarette use or vaping or the use of vaping products before we can say that this is part of the EVALI. The EVALI
yes,
is
the
actually the
classification.
term now that no, it's the right term.
Yes.
It's the disease. It's the term of the disease for the e-cigarette vape associated lung injury. So that's EVALI. Yes.
Because this is relatively a new classification,
Yes.
no?
It's a
How-
new name. It's a new name for a disease, and it's not really a new classification,
yes.
but it will fall under that classification. Yes.
Okay, so how do we change, say, the mindset of doctors? Because you mentioned that they aren't used to asking these things. Nga.
Yes.
So how do we start?
So very
disseminating
important that we
information?
have to keep on reminding our fellow doctors to always ask already, make it part of their history taking. The asking questions on the use of e-cigarettes or any vaping products. It's not usual for us to be doing it, but now it has to be included, and we have also to probably incorporate it as part of the curriculum in medical school, so that the younger colleagues will already have the an idea that they should really make it as part of their history taking process.
Okay, so we have heard about studies in the U.S. particularly. I think one study recently said that lung injury related to vaping is similar to lung injury caused by inhalation of mustard gas, for example. So they're called chemical burns inside the lungs. Here in the Philippines, of course, we base also how we look at e-cigarettes on studies in the US. But some might say studies aren't conclusive enough yet. There are not many studies yet. So what do you say to that?
I think that as long as there is potential for harm, and we know that the possibility is there, then for us physicians, it is incumbent upon us to really ensure that we get the history of vaping. And once we get the history of vaping and we see that this is most likely because of the use of e-cigarettes, then we have to, we are obligated, we are morally obligated to advise our patients to stop using it, because otherwise then he will continually be faced with the same problems, and eventually he might really suffer from a chronic lung disease that is not going to really give him better life. In fact, it's just going to cause him a lot of misery. So this is exactly what we have also seen with cigarette smoking. When the tobacco product was brought in the country, and even before, when it was first used, they really did not have any idea that it is going to cause this much problem. But look at it right now. We all know, and there is no doubt already about it, that it is causing a lot of diseases, and it's actually considered to be the number one killer, no? Well, at least, if not in the world, but at least in the country, it is the number one killer. And I think that with e-cigarette, it is not really far from the history that we have seen with tobacco. So it will still also be the same, because the chemicals are exactly are exactly the same. Maybe it's just a matter of time on when you're going to develop the disease. But mind you, e-cigarettes also has some other chemicals that are not found in cigarettes. I don't know if I have not really seen if propylene glycol is seen with conventional cigarette, but this is a regular chemical that is found in e-cigarettes, and glycerin, glycerin also, because these two, they are the humectants, and they are the ones that are responsible for the cloud that you see when you use e-cigarettes. So of course, the more the glycerin, the heavier the cloud, and some people are just amazed with the clouds that they are able to form, with e-cigarettes. But I think just like with the clouds that we have, it can also bring doom.
Yeah. So just so we're clear, when we talk about e-cigarettes, can you describe which kinds of products these are for our viewers? Like, I know there are e-cigarettes that look like cigarettes, but just, they light up sa dulo. So what kind of e-cigarettes are we talking about there?
Yeah, e-cigarettes really, it's very much the same as with the cigarettes, except that one part is the device which contains the battery, and the one that heats up the juice, no? So you have to put the juice there, and in the juice you have still some the juice, you put it in the cotton, and it is connected to a rod, and and when it hits the heating mechanism, heats up, it is going to sort of give this discoloration to the cotton. So it's like it's quite similar to cigarettes, except that it is not as darkly discolored as a real cigarette, but it is still discolored. Okay, so because you subject it to heat, no, and anything that is subjected to heat, then it starts to be discolored.
Okay. So in the US po, they've already called this an epidemic actually, because
Yes,
over 1,000 cases and over 20 deaths.
I think number one, they called it an epidemic in the use of e-cigarette because of the number of people using it. So they are calling it an epidemic. Now, we are now referring to the EVALI, some kind of an epidemic as well, but it's an epidemic of the disease caused about by e-cigarettes. So we have an epidemic primarily because of the number of people, particularly the young ones, because it's really the young people who are already taking up e-cigarettes, and that's why, because of the sheer number of the people taking up e-cigarettes, then they call it an epidemic of vaping. And then now, with the disease, the EVALI, we are also now having an epidemic of EVALI. No, in fact, the latest report coming from the CDC, there are now nearly 1,500 cases of confirmed e-cigarette or vape-associated lung injury. And from these nearly 1,500, there are already 33 deaths. So, I've never seen this much number of people afflicted with such lung disease before, and this is also first time that I've seen rapid increase, so much number of people dying already in a very fast rate. I think the reason for that, because really in the US, there are so many of them who are already using e-cigarette, and that is why for us Filipinos, for us physicians, we are really bothered, with what we are seeing here in the country we're in. particularly with the introduction of the newer type of e-cigarette like the Juul. In the US, the reason why there was this rapid increase is because with the entry of the Juul, which is very trendy. If you look at it, it's like similar to just the flash drive, and any young individuals will be attracted to it. So because it's just like their gadget. And so that's why we see an epidemic of people using e-cigarettes, and we follow the Americans, the patterns of the Americans. So we're really afraid that it will also come to that proportion, and we will have now problems like similar to what is being seen in the US.
The Department of Health has done measures to prevent this epidemic, at least from happening here. So they wanted to regulate e-cigarettes.
Right.
But now, as you know, they face court injunctions from some distributors or sellers. So,
so
what do you think about this?
That
What
was
do you think
in
about this
passing.
case?
It's very unfortunate that the court actually issued an injunction, but it only shows that whoever that person or that company who brought the FDA to court, it means that they don't want to be regulated. Then if they don't want to be regulated, then probably what we need to do is push for a ban, because they don't want to be regulated. And the FDA is just doing their job. It's part of the job is really to ensure that the products that are being used by any Filipinos, for that matter, for all, including them, including the one who sued, okay, they will be assured that this product can be taken in safely, that there will be safety nets, that this is not going to cause undue harm to people. So that is just what the FDA is doing. So I cannot understand why they are against the regulation. Probably what they want is ban.
So you're talking about a ban now, but
Yes.
How do we balance this? Don't you think that if you ban e-cigarettes, people might go back to just regular cigarettes? Because I've been hearing people say that, what if we ban it, then people go back to regular cigarettes instead?
As long as we maintain the measures, the interventions that we are now instituting in the country, like the ban of smoking, the further push for increased taxes on tobacco products, and then we probably push for other regulations on the sale and the use of tobacco, like maybe regulating also the use of the ingredient of flavors in cigarettes, then I don't think that we will still be faced with an increasing number of smokers in the country. As we see in our experience for the past few years, we are actually achieving the results that we want to see. The prevalence of smoking in the country is slowly going down. No, I'm not saying that it is drastically going down, and that by tomorrow we'll be able to see no more Filipino smoking. I don't think that is going to happen overnight, but at least we know that it is the prevalence of smoking is slowly going down. And as of the 2018 expanded National Nutrition Survey, wherein the Filipinos were asked about their smoking status, so we see that the prevalence has gone down to 20%. So, and from previous years, I think 2015, that we are at around 23%. So slowly we're going there. So I don't think that it is true immediately that once you regulate e-cigarettes, people will now start suddenly shift to conventional cigarettes. And then also remember that many of those who are many of those who are using e-cigarettes are actually in the US, as we see it. Many of them are dual users, meaning to say that they're using e-cigarette and at the same time they're smoking cigarette. So it's not, if ever, they're still continuing to use cigarette. And many of also those, although they purports to say that it can help in smoking cessation, but really the studies that were published in the Lancet journal, we can see that there are a lot of flaws in the methodology, and that it does not necessarily mean that the people who are using e-cigarettes really have stopped smoking, because for them in that particular study, they say that there is abstinence if you are smoking at least 5 sticks. That is not the usual, by the way. When you say abstinence rate, or the person has stopped smoking, that means that you have completely stopped, zero. But for this particular study, their definition of abstinence is it has gone down to 5. So in reality, people have not really stopped smoking.
Okay, and lastly, what should people who want to quit smoking and vaping do? How do they start their journey into smoking cessation?
Well, the first and foremost is, of course, they have to have the desire to quit. No, and once they have the desire to quit, there should also be an acceptance that they will probably be needing some help. Not all individuals can really stop smoking just by sheer will, by sheer determination. Well, some will be able to do that, but we know for a fact that not all smokers will be able to do that. So definitely they will be needing help, and help will mean that they seek professional cessation specialists, and with the help of the tobacco cessation specialist, and for this particular case, that will already include the use of vape cessation in vaping, then we will be able to provide various intervention, and interventions can be from the use of pharmacology, and most especially we are actually providing also counseling and behavioral modification as modes of intervention. So these things, from my experience in the cessation clinic, it is very important that we use a combination of interventions for us to have higher success rate.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Limpin. This has been Rappler Talk.